Happy everyone. Happy everyone could be here. Glad to see folks signing up and joining. My name is Duran. I'll do a full introduction of myself and others in just a moment. But you are in the right place if you're here to learn about nature-based sequestration. I feel like one of the flight attendants on a Southwest airline flights. If you're going to Chicago, you're on the right plane. So if you want to learn about nature-based sequestration, you're in the right place. I see 100, 120. We do expect a large crowd here today, so we're very excited that you could all join us. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and begin. It is 10 a.m. I want to thank you all for joining the Climate Center's Climate Safe California webinar series, brought to you by the Climate Center. Our CEO, Ellie Cohen, will be coming on in just a couple of minutes. She'll tell you more about who the Climate Center is, and she'll tell you more about Climate Safe California and how you can join over 1,000 folks, organizations, businesses, and elected officials who've endorsed our policy platform. So it's very exciting. We're happy you could all be here. Let me just tell you a little bit more about what this is. Today is one of the webinars in our Climate Safe California webinar series. I know many of the folks joining us here today have attended some of the other webinars. If you have, welcome back. If this is your first one, welcome. We do have a couple more webinars in the series that we're hoping you'll consider joining, particularly Funding Climate Action, a Bond and Beyond on June 22nd, and our Climate Safe California Policy Summit, where we bring it all together, bring all the endorsers and others together to help us accelerate our climate goals. Funding Climate Action will be on June 22nd from 10 to 11:30. We have Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia, Jamie Callahan from the Governor's Office, and Denny Zane, founder of Move LA. We expect more speakers, so to find out more about those, you can go to theclimatecenter.org. I'm also going to ask my colleague, Nina, who you'll be meeting a little bit later in this webinar, to drop a link to the registration page into the chat. I want to take a moment to thank all the people who made this possible. Our sponsors, Renewable America, Enphase, Jackson Family Wines, who we'll be hearing from later today, Recology Sonoma Marin, Willow Creek Wealth Management, Soylent Company. These people actually make compost, so a very important part of the sequestration puzzle. MCE Clean Energy, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, our many CCA partners, and Ellie will talk a little bit more about why CCAs love us so much. Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, also River City Bank, Sunrun, and our friends at Terra Verde. Thank you all for your financial support that makes this possible here today. Of course, none of this would matter without the 200 plus people who've already joined this webinar. Thank you all for being here and welcome. And many of you are here through the efforts of our many promotional partners, showing once again, climate action is a team sport. So thanks to the Better World Group, Actera, ZEV 2030, Calcan, who we'll be hearing from, Grid Alternatives, Joint Venture, Silicon Valley, the Clean Coalition, California League of Conservation Voters, Climate Resolve, Drawdown Bay Area, Local Government Commission, Center for Sustainable Energy, and the Community Environmental Council, all of whom we are working with to spread the word on Climate Safe California. You can find out more about all that at theclimatecenter.org. And to tell you more about who we are, what we do, and how you can help, I'm happy to now introduce my colleague, our CEO, Ellie Cohen. Ellie?
Thank you so much. I just want to be able to share my screen, and I am not able to. I am disabled. I would like to be enabled. But I'll get started while that gets set up, to just say thanks again so much, everybody, for being here. The Climate Center is a climate and energy policy nonprofit founded in 2001. We're perhaps best known for the key role we played in the tremendous growth of community choice energy agencies throughout California. The first one was in Marin County in 2010, the second in Sonoma County 2014. Today, there are 24 CCAs in California serving between 80 to 90% greenhouse gas free electricity to over 11 million Californians. It's really quite phenomenal and a great example of our mission, speed and scale greenhouse gas reduction. So let me, I can share my screen now. Here you go. I'll go through this kind of quickly, but basically I just want to frame our discussion for today. So Many of the leading countries on climate change are focused their climate goals on what the United Nations determined in October of 2018 around the 1.5 C report, to keep warming in the industrial era below 1.5 C. And that meant cutting emissions by half, essentially, by 2030, and removing up to 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of those warming compounds from the atmosphere to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and stay under 1.5. The problem is that not only is this the lowest common denominator because they operate by consensus, but it's also that there's a lot of new science showing we have to do much more, much faster. We will now pass the 1.5 C dangerous threshold of warming by 2030, or maybe even earlier, at least a decade earlier than the UN IPCC projected. We've had a record surge of methane emissions over the past several years. Methane is 80 times greater as a more powerful agent of warming than carbon dioxide over 20 years. It probably is one of the key reasons that climate change has been accelerating so quickly. The majority of that increase is not because of cows, but it's actually because of fracking in North America. We are feeling the impacts of this here in California and in the West. We are now in the early stages of a global warming induced severe mega drought that threatens a Dust Bowl-like economy as early as 2027 in California. And it could be incredibly costly in terms of food security, jobs, and much more. We need to treat this as the emergency that it is. The nation and the world are looking to California to lead for a climate-safe future. We know we need more aggressive, equitable policies and accelerated timelines now. We developed Climate Safe California with the goal of ensuring that by 2025, we will have enacted the bold policies required by science to dramatically cut emissions, start drawdown, and secure resilient communities for everyone by 2030, inspiring global action. So it really is accelerating current goals from 2045 to 2030. We know 2045 is simply too late, and that means taking current laws and doing much more with nature-based sequestration. This just shows some of the pathways. In the circle here are what we want to get to by 2030, with great reductions in the key sectors in emissions and a gigantic increase in sequestration. This is all possible. It's really based on political will. Our guiding principles are that our work has to be based on the latest science. We have to ensure a just transition for fossil fuel workers, their families, and their communities. And we have to prioritize climate justice, which we believe is racial justice, and ensure that lower income communities are no longer disproportionately harmed by fossil fuels, and that these communities have equal access to climate solutions. The types of policies required: we have to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuel development, production, and use. We have to scale up nature-based sequestration. Our goal is to get to 100 million metric tons additionally sequestered per year by 2030. Again, it's possible, it's feasible, it just requires the political will and the funding. We need to invest in community resilience, and we need to fund climate action, we think, to the tune of 12 to 20 billion a year. Today, we're focused on nature-based sequestration, and that really is about a variety of practices, including some that we'll hear about today with carbon farming and gardening, climate smart habitat restoration on land and on the coast, enhancing protected habitats, and engaging indigenous communities and traditional ecological knowledge. We're excited to have with us today Assembly Member Robert Rivas, and we'll hear more about his fantastic bills, AB 125 and 284, that help bring the money and establish goals for the first time, climate goals for natural and working lands. I want to be clear that we're not talking about technological carbon removal. We're not talking about carbon capture and storage that removes carbon dioxide from power plants and industrial processes. We don't support that. We think that that actually allows the fossil fuel industry to continue and the climate injustices to continue. We are not talking about direct air capture technologies, which may be essential for us 15 or 20 years from now for life to survive on our planet, but it is in the very earliest stages, and right now is incredibly expensive and incredibly energy intensive with impacts on the local environment. What we're talking about today is nature-based sequestration. Governor Newsom announced recently we have an enormous surplus in the state, with about 11 billion of that going to climate action this year and in future years. We have put together a request to the budget committees in the state legislature to double that amount And that includes 5.4 billion for nature-based sequestration over the next 2 years. There are all sorts of co-benefits that we're going to hear more about today that are essential to sustain life in California and on our planet. And nature-based solutions with sequestration can play a big role in ensuring that. Our house is on fire. We have to ask at every level of society, are we doing enough? And we invite you today to endorse Climate Safe California. California can remove more climate pollution than we emit by 2030, but we have to start soon and we have to act big now. Thank you. Back to you, Duran.
All right, thank you, Ellie. And we do urge everybody to take a moment to click on and endorse Climate Safe California. Over 1,100 organizations and individuals, just like you have done so. So you can click on that link at any time or save it for later. We're hoping to get a bunch more endorsements here today, and we'll be reporting on those numbers towards the end. I am happy now to introduce our next speaker, who is Jeannie Merrill. And Jeannie, why don't you go ahead and tell people a little bit about yourself and CalCan. We're very glad you're here, and then you can introduce the assembly member. Jeannie, go ahead.
Great, I'm happy to be here. Again, my name is Jeannie Merrill. I'm the policy director with the California Climate and Agriculture Network. We are a coalition of organic and sustainable agriculture organizations working to promote agricultural solutions to the climate crisis. I wanted to say just a few words about carbon sequestration, opportunities for ag solutions to the climate crisis, highlight a couple important bills that Ellie spoke of, which was a great introduction, and then turn it over to Assemblymember Robert Rivas. As the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change noted in their Climate and Land report of just a few years ago, we simply will not address the climate crisis in a comprehensive and much needed way without looking to natural working lands climate solution.
That's it at all.
Oh.
Jesus Christ, Jeannie.
I think we've got to mute.
Yeah, Duran, you need to be muted.
Yeah, there we go. The soil has the potential to serve as a carbon sink, and that's through the process called soil carbon sequestration. It's when atmospheric carbon dioxide is converted by photosynthesis in plants to organic forms of carbon and stored in soils. And building healthy soils can sequester carbon and is an important opportunity for agriculture, both to mitigate as well as adapt, become more resilient to climate change, which our upcoming panelists will speak to in greater detail. But agriculture also has the opportunity to reduce very potent greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide and like methane, as Ellie spoke about, by changing on-farm management practices in a variety of ways, reducing the use and reliance on synthetic inputs, using alternative manure management and more, which we'll get into in greater detail. But we need a policy framework in California to get there. And there are two bills that I just wanted to highlight. One is AB 284, which will require the Air Resources Board, when updating their scoping plan, all the different ways that the state is going to achieve its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. When doing that, they have to come up with a 2045 climate goal with interim milestones along the way for the state's natural and working lands to help achieve carbon neutrality, and then develop the policy pathways to get there. California is certainly a leader when it comes to action on climate change, but we're behind, quite frankly, when it comes to natural and working lands climate solutions. And AB 284 is an important step forward in moving natural and working lands climate solutions to the fore. Another important bill is AB 125. It would place a $3.3 billion bond measure on the ballot before voters in the fall of 2022 to fund economic recovery and climate resilience in our food and farm system. Recognizing the pandemic has had tremendous impacts on food and agriculture, and also recognizing that food and agriculture is essential in a variety of ways to our climate, to essential workers, to combating hunger, and to developing regional food economies. So we're excited for what AB 125 as it advances. It's already received strong bipartisan support and has over 160 groups in support. We would not have these two groundbreaking pieces of legislation if it weren't for an important champion in the state legislature. And Assemblymember Robert Rivas, who I'm pleased to introduce, is that champion. Mr. Rivas represents California's 30th Assembly District, and he has done so since 2018. And he serves as the chair of the Assembly Agriculture Committee and as vice chair of the Latino Legislative Caucus. As a lifelong resident of the district, Mr. Rivas has served 2 terms on the San Benito County Board of Supervisors prior to becoming an assembly member. And Assemblymember Rivas grew up in a farm worker family in Paicines, California. And Assemblymember Rivas understands the complexities of agriculture and is a champion for agricultural issues, including agricultural solutions to the climate crisis. So Mr. Rivas, please.
Thank you, Jeannie. I really appreciate that introduction. It's always so great to see you, and hope that in short time we'll have the opportunity to visit in person. I know that this has been a very difficult time, but certainly, one thing is absolutely certain, has been mentioned throughout this initial call or event, is that, in our efforts to suppress, this unexpected pandemic, it has really exacerbated a lot of the issues that still exist prior to this pandemic, housing crisis and homelessness, and our climate crisis. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. And it's fair to say that we are all here because we all recognize the need for bold action. Setting ambitious climate goals is incredibly important, but working to meet those goals is critical. And working to meet those goals, building the strategy and the pathways to meet these climate goals, it's a heavy lift. It's a lot of work. And as we all know, the status quo simply isn't working. And it hasn't worked for a very, very long time. Goals that were considered major or trend-setting just a few years ago and now seem inadequate for the challenges we're facing on the current this timetable. And in my own district, I represent a beautiful district, the 30th Assembly District, where I have been, where I've lived my entire life, as was mentioned. But it is a district that includes parts of 4 counties. It is largely an agricultural district. Our district grows about 2/3 of the world's leafy greens. It is a district that includes San Ardo, one of the 4th largest oil producing areas in the state. And it's also a district that includes Big Sur, the iconic Big Sur. And so it's a district that has a very strong footprint for environmental activism. Very proud in my 2 terms in the Board of Supervisors included the first comprehensive ban on hydraulic fracking in the state of California by voter initiative in my small home county of San Benito, and a couple years later in the county of Monterey. But I mention that because, in my own district, just in the last few years, we have seen the largest, most destructive wildfires since, European colonization. We've seen mass blackouts on a scale not imagined since the energy crisis. We've seen farm workers more and more impacted by extreme heat and by dangerous air quality events, while the drought has knocked out some of our most important crops, not to mention knocking out low-wage job opportunities for our most vulnerable families. And clearly the impacts of climate change are accelerating, especially in our low income and our disadvantaged inland communities. So our solutions to addressing our climate crisis, they need to accelerate. And at the heart of these challenges is the need to expand our climate portfolio here in California, to work and diversify the tools that we can use to mitigate our climate crisis, because tackling climate change is more doable, in my opinion, than ever. Having been actively involved in climate change issues since 2011, when I was first elected to the Board of Supervisors in the county of San Benito, and during my time in elective office, urgency to address our climate crisis, it continues to grow. And clearly it's time for us to think very differently about addressing our climate crisis. And having, as I mentioned, grown up in San Benito County in rural California, I can tell you that rural communities are truly on the front lines when it comes to climate change. and the negative impacts of our changing climate. The way we think about water usage and storage, about housing, and how we develop resilient and healthy communities, transportation, how we can maximize existing infrastructure, improve our mobility, improve traffic flow, and agriculture. How can we maximize the one proven cost-effective method of pulling carbon directly from the atmosphere and storing it in our soils and vegetation? Honestly, I can think that carbon, I think that carbon sequestration should be prioritized here in California's fight against climate change. It should be one of our top efforts and areas of focus. When I was very excited to have the opportunity in my first term at the last fall, when Speaker Rendon appointed me to chair agriculture. Agriculture has always been a very important for myself and my family. It's been a source of pride for myself and my family. And when Speaker Rendon asked me what it was I wanted to focus on, it was I wanted to focus on creating a more resilient food system that starts with bridging this gap between agriculture, how we grow our food, and mitigating our climate crisis. And as a state, we have made a lot of progress in this effort, but much more needs to be done. Investments need to be made. And these investments should be made because clearly in other sectors where emissions reduction is the focus, the momentum is largely in the right direction, but unfortunately the momentum isn't enough, and we urgently need to accelerate it. And in some sectors, we could talk about cement, some production and the like, there's very little momentum at all. But in the big areas where we need to reduce emissions, energy, transportation, and what have you, the technologies are getting cheaper and cheaper. So what we're seeing are these big industry players are slowly starting to shift towards sustainability. However, again, to be clear, we need to move much more quickly in these areas because this is an emergency. And unfortunately, we can't say the same for carbon sequestration on our natural working lands. And that's why it's been a focus of mine as chair of agriculture, why it's been a focus in my short time here in the legislature. We currently don't have enough momentum in this space to prioritize and do more and make these investments that must be made to sequester carbon. We know that we've already emitted more carbon than our atmosphere can handle. And in some areas, such as in California, recent wildfires have grown larger and more destructive, and are only exacerbating our problems and minimizing our climate progress overall. And that's where I'll have to give a shout out to groups like the Climate Center in CalCan that are valiantly working to turn the tide. And that's where we need to step up our efforts. As was mentioned by Jeannie, I've introduced 4 pieces of legislation this session to try and make a dent in this issue and to raise this awareness. And started, all of these efforts started by the agricultural tour that I took and that I'm have continued, which was derailed a little bit because of the spike in COVID-19 cases in December. But based on those visits and working with stakeholders, the first of these bills was Assembly Bill 125 for about our food and farming bond measure, which aims to make the kind of real investments that those sectors need to achieve sustainability within our food system. CalCan is a sponsor of this measure already, and I'm grateful for their support and their advocacy for all that they've done on behalf of this bill. Food and farming have historically been an afterthought in state funding conversations, but with this bond, we're changing that. Second, next year, the Air Resources Board will conduct its last scoping plan exercise before the late 2020s. And so we've worked very hard, amid this critical juncture in our climate crisis, that we need to not only make sure the scoping plan looks at how we can use natural and working lands to reach our climate goals, but also set ambitious climate goals in those sectors. Bring experts together to start to develop these pathways and strategies on how we can leverage our natural working lands in our fight against climate change. And so, as was also mentioned by Jeannie, introduced Assembly Bill 284 to do just that. Not surprisingly, we run into some opposition from conventional from the conventional ag industry, but we're working with them, and we'll continue to work with them, because agriculture in general has everything to lose with the changes that we've experienced in our climate. And the third effort we've undertaken is we introduced Assembly Bill 303, which comes out of the recognition that the world will want even more food, animal protein especially, and as fresh water, arable land, and other resources become less available. And so sustainable mariculture, the cultivation of shellfish and seaweed in the ocean, can sequester carbon, as recent studies have shown the significant the benefits of this mariculture, this cultivation. And it can also produce large quantities of healthy food with a minimal environmental footprint. I know it's controversial, but it's absolutely must be part of our solution. We should have this discussion. And finally, I'm pleased to report that we were recently able to declare victory on one piece of legislation, which is Assembly Bill 252. It's legislation that proposed to create a new program to reuse irrigated land set to be fallowed due to the implementation of California's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And the basic concept is that instead of fallowing land in a patchwork, we should seek to approach potential land fallowing strategically to create new wildlife habitat, encourage groundwater recharge, healthy rangelands, and certainly much more. We had proposed the program be funded at $50 million. The governor recently, he proposed to fund the program at $500 million in this budget. And just let me say, it's wonderful to have a governor who recognizes that natural and working lands must be a priority for the state of California. And finally, there's some great legislation on this topic as well from many of my colleagues, two in particular, Assemblymember Ash Kalra, Senator Nancy Skinner. And I'm really excited about all of these efforts. And if we can get all of this done this year, if we can pass the governor's historic budget that invests so much in our natural and working lands, it will have been a monumental legislative session on this front. But we have to recognize that even after all that, we'll still just be getting started. And as I mentioned before, we are still further behind in natural working lands carbon sequestration than almost any other aspect of our fight against climate change. And as such, it needs arguably the most focus and urgent attention at this time. As I mentioned, we need bigger, bolder goals, and the Climate Center's proposal to sequester 100 million metric tons of carbon in natural working lands every year starting in 2030 should be our guiding light here in this state. And with that, really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. We really appreciate it. Assume you can hear me okay. Sometimes my microphone acts weird, but you can hear me good. Thank you so much. And we're very happy you'll be able to stick around for the Q&A coming up after the next couple of speakers. So folks, please keep those questions coming in the Q&A and we'll get to them after our next two speakers. So I do want to move along here and to talk about why nature-based sequestration is so crucial. I'd like to introduce Michelle Pacero from the Nature Conservancy. Michelle, the floor is yours if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing and your take on nature-based sequestration.
Great, thank you very much. I am going to attempt to share my screen here. And let's see. So far, can you all see it here? And I'll start my slideshow from the beginning here. Okay, are you able to see that? Terrific. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate being a part of this webinar and all the work that the Climate Center is involved in. And it's a pleasure to follow Assembly Member Robert Rivas. And we truly appreciate him being a champion for climate change, for nature-based strategies, and really for lifting everybody up as a part of this effort. I'm going to let you know some work that we've been involved in for the past 20 years working on climate change, California.
Sorry, just if you've got a screen in your next slide showing, if you could, I don't know if you can adjust that to just show the slide that you're showing. Like a full screen or something.
Let's see. I am not quite sure. It's a full screen on my screen here, so I'm not quite sure. Let me see if that does anything.
No, We see your slide there. We see your slide and your next slide, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So if you can fix it, great. If not, go to
Yeah.
presentation.
Right. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
Well,
A couple
I will do
other
my
people.
best here.
Okay, there you go. Perfect.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
It's hard to tell. I have two different monitors here, so apologies.
All good.
This here. I direct California's, the TNC California's climate program. The Nature Conservancy is a global organization, and both globally and across the US and in California, we are working to address climate change. We see it as one of the greatest threats to our mission to protect the lands and waters upon which all life depends. As part of the solution set, it's not the only thing, but it is an important part. We do see that nature can play a critical role in addressing climate change, and defining that term broadly, really to include our agricultural lands, our grasslands, our urban areas, our forests, our wetlands, the spectrum really, to both using the way we manage and conserve and restore these lands to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and also protecting communities against impacts. This may be familiar to most of you, but just in case, just a little 101 on how how nature and our systems really can help address and balance our climate. As vegetation and trees grow, they absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they fix the CO2 as carbon on branches, leaves, roots, and in the soil over time. And it accumulates over time. And in a healthy system, it's a healthy net sink of carbon dioxide. But when these vegetation and the land gets disturbed, either through some natural disturbances like fire or pests, or through more human-caused disturbances like clearing, certain management practices, or harvest or conversion to more intensive uses, that carbon dioxide can be released into the atmosphere. And so the idea here as part of the climate solution is really to manage, restore, and protect in a way where the balance is in favor of a healthy net sink, and to grow that over time. At the global level, as many of you may know, the way we use our land and how whether it's agricultural land, or if we convert our land, or forestry, contributes roughly 23% of overall greenhouse gas emissions, which is pretty significant. At the same time, if we change the way we manage the land, if we conserve it and restore it, we actually can flip that around. And so there are some studies out there, some that have been done by the Nature Conservancy with other colleagues, estimate that roughly 37% of the reductions we need to meet the Paris goals, and Ellie had mentioned this earlier, around that 1.5, keeping it below 1.5 degrees Celsius by mid-century, about over a third can be met through nature-based strategies, alongside the other approaches in other sectors. We also need to include it as part of that solution set. If we take this down to California, and we look out into the future of what is potential impacts to California's, we'll call them natural working lands, with considering different climate impacts, the trajectory looks like our lands become an increasing net source of emissions. And this is out to 2100. Several colleagues of mine worked on this paper. This is carbon, and it includes different climate scenarios, whether it's a warm, wet future, a hot, dry future. There's lots of variables, but this looks at the fate of carbon across California's landscape based on different land use scenarios and different climate futures. And so when you look at the median line here, it's roughly a 10% drop in carbon out to 2100. And we see some of that happening now, right? When we see some of the fires that are occurring due to climate impacts, but other causes still can be due to conversion of land and how we certain management practices across the landscape. the good news is we can do something about it. We've worked on several studies looking at different interventions or different management, restoration, and conservation practices across California's landscape. And you can see in the legend just to the left, we were able to model about 13 different practices. And there could be more. These are the ones that we could use with the model that we used. And when we project this out to 2050, that cumulative estimate is about 514 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And so it's significant. It's a pretty meaningful number. And we did map out spatially what acres may be suitable for these types of activities. Certainly, there needs to be more refined work done to analyze specifically, when and where these kinds of activities are appropriate. There's about 28 million acres that could be available for these types of activities. And so keeping that 500 million metric ton carbon dioxide number in mind, we drew this out. This is just the carbon neutrality goal that has been set by executive order in California, and comparing it, looking at it relative to the 2030 goal or the 2050 goal, which was an older goal set under Governor Schwarzenegger out to 2050, and what the delta is for reaching carbon neutrality. And that's just over 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So when you think about that 500 million plus from the land base, the contribution is pretty meaningful. There are a lot of questions we still need to figure out about how natural working lands, both from the emission side and the carbon sequestration side, should actually fit into goal setting and in the statewide inventory. But the main takeaway from this slide really is just to convey that, that there can be a significant contribution by our natural working lands in California. So a reminder of what these activities look like on the ground. They're very real, they're very tangible to us. Sometimes when we think about emission reductions, it's hard to envision them. The wonderful thing about nature-based strategies is that they're charismatic, right? And we see it every day. It's around us. It's one of the reasons, why California is iconic in those landscapes. The other important thing about nature-based strategies is that they produce multiple benefits. These activities that we're talking about not only help address climate change, but they help us for a variety of our needs, our services, whether we're talking about habitat for species, flood risk reduction, groundwater recharge, productive agricultural lands, and open space. So we really get a lot, not just the climate benefits, but so much more about our overall well-being. We benefit from that. We did also calculate the social cost of carbon as part of a study, and these slides are from our study. And that's over $24 billion can be saved when we refer back to that 500 million metric ton reduction opportunity. So we can avoid these types of damages from climate impacts when we start to implement these activities over time. And I just want to wrap up with a path forward here. I think Ellie mentioned early on about the budget surplus and the billions of dollars that are available. That is a terrific opportunity for the state to really make a significant down payment and investment in our natural and working lands to ramp up these activities. This is something we need to do. It's not a conversation just about offsets. This is about the imperative of really including our natural and working lands as part of the state's climate solution. There's multiple benefits that come from it. We just need to increase the pace and scale of action to really meet the need of our times. And we have policy tools that are readily available. We have lots of programs that are out there. What really is key at this point is greater investment, more coordination than we have ever seen before across institutions, but across governments from the state down to the ground to landowners. And public-private partnerships are another opportunity and are key to our solutions and being successful over time. So thank you very much. Really appreciate being here today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate your slides and your perspective and all the work that you do and everyone here. And I'm happy to say we've got a lot of questions coming in. And we will get to those questions in a moment. I think that there's some really interesting stuff to talk about, but in order that we have some time to talk about our questions, I'd like to turn it over now to Amanda Hanson from the California Natural Resources Agency to give us a little perspective from the state agency perspective. So Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for being here today and to all of my fellow panelists. It's really a pleasure to join you. And I want to just sort of echo everything that's already been said and maybe go into a little bit more detail around some of the evolution of how this issue has evolved over time across state agencies in thinking about our climate portfolio in California. Natural and working lands has been a sector that has been included in the scoping plan, which is the state's vision for how we're going to achieve our greenhouse gas emission reductions. It's also been reflected in all of our state adaptation strategies, which is the state's plan for how we're going to build resilience to the impacts of climate change and reduce risks to people and to nature from those impacts. So we have a very solid foundation, but I think it has been made clear by all the speakers before me, and I would echo this, that there's a lot more that we can and must do at this point to deliver climate action through our lands to achieve our big picture climate goals. So, the governor issued an executive order last fall on nature-based solutions, really to drive this action that is needed and to build the momentum that Assemblymember Rivas mentioned earlier that is so critical and so critically needed. It is a very robust executive order that contains a lot of results-oriented deliverables, and I would just mention sort of two of them at the very highest of levels, which are it establishes as a state goal to conserve 30% of the state's lands and coastal waters by 2030. And this goal will contribute both to California's climate change goals. It will also support our biodiversity, our goals to protect biodiversity and increase equity in California. The other deliverable I would mention from the executive order is the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. And I think for anyone who may have been involved in the development of a few years ago, something called the Draft Natural and Working Lands Implementation Plan, I think I want to just make it super clear that the intention for this climate smart strategy is to really build on all of the work that has been done to date and also take some of the ongoing work that's taking place, our action in our forests, efforts that we're making to restore wetlands, the work that we're doing in cities and communities to help increase tree canopy and to utilize green infrastructure. The goal here is to set out in one place sort of a vision for how our lands can really help us contribute to achieving our climate change goals across the state. So, it's intended to be a high-level strategy that really sets out the vision, the long-term vision for achieving climate goals on our lands. There are, as has been mentioned, many reasons to do this. The science tells us that we will not achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 without this sector being a significant part of the solution. And, we also know that if we don't achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, the worst impacts, we will not be avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. And so we need our lands to be helping us in this effort. If they're not helping us, then they can hurt us with all of the carbon that can be released during these disturbances, whether it's a wildfire or some other disturbance that releases a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. The benefits of these efforts are well understood across the administration to be beyond climate. So, food and water security, economic prosperity through, jobs, tourism, recreation. We've got just incredible biodiversity that must be protected in California. So there's many, many reasons that these actions can be sort of characterized as multiple benefit. I don't love that term, but that is what it is, you can spend $1 and get one outcome if you replace a widget, whereas in the land sector, you can spend $1 and achieve multiple outcomes. So it's really, economically a strategic move as well. So, I do just want to say that as we build out this natural working lands climate smart strategy, we are working really hard to understand what regional priorities are in this space and where the state might be able to help sort of move those priorities forward through the strategy. We are in consultation processes with tribes to understand how we might be able to incorporate some traditional practices that will allow us to achieve these climate benefits and other benefits on our lands. But also explore, opportunities for increased co-management of lands through our climate smart land strategy. And as has also been mentioned, we've just put out a budget with significant investments in climate smart lands programs and efforts. We've got habitat restoration funding, riparian corridor and restoration programs, significant money, $2 billion going into our forests and protecting the state from wildfire, $200 million for urban and community forestry. There's funding for the urban agricultural program at CDFA. So a very broad and diverse suite of nature-based solutions included in the budget that we're really excited about and see as sort of a first step to push us in the direction that we clearly need to go. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up, but I'm happy. I saw a couple of questions in the chat that I might just quickly try to respond to, and I'm terrible at double tasking, so apologies, I'm not going to get to everything, but somebody flagged, there was a couple chat comments around the definition of low-income communities and sort of adjusting that. And I just want to flag that the Governor's Office of Planning and Research is going to be kicking off very soon a process to develop a platform that will take existing data, but in a sort of a way that has never been combined before to help us understand where climate vulnerable communities are in California. So I think, participating in that process would be something that you might be interested in contributing to. So I would check out their website. And then there was another question around, or just flag around urban forest development. And I did want to point out that CAL FIRE does have a program, the Community and Urban and Community Forestry Program. And that is exactly what they do, is they help municipalities identify trees that will be able to withstand projected climate impacts, have low water usage. I would also just flag that this issue, the nexus someone raised with extreme heat is something that we're paying a lot of attention to. The state is updating our adaptation strategy this year, and really hope that all of you can contribute to that conversation as well. We're going to be kicking off regional workshops next week. But the issue of extreme heat is one that I think is going to be taking center stage, because we have a lot of efforts in other arenas on building resilience, and there's less of a strategy on extreme heat in California. So I just want to thank that person who raised it and flagged that we're on it, and that we would welcome your input on how to be better on it through the state adaptation strategy update. And I'll wrap it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for clearing some of the questions off the deck. We appreciate that. We've had a lot of great questions. I'd like to invite the Assembly member to come back, and perhaps I'll start with you, Assembly Member Rivas. We had several questions around California's cap and trade program for forestry. And of course, we're talking about nature-based sequestration. We're focusing a lot on agriculture. But what can you tell us from your perspective? And I'm happy to have the others answer. Is the cap and trade program for forestry working? Is it working well? And if not, what changes are necessary? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I can't really speak on the cap and trade program. It was certainly, it was before my time, but I can tell you that I know that there's been a huge effort to leverage monies that go into cap and trade for many, many uses and some purposes. And so that's why I think our approach when it comes to carbon sequestration in particular, when it comes to our natural working lands, is rather than be reliant on cap and trade, is to create or to hopefully work with this administration in prioritizing a dedicated stream of revenue, an ongoing stream of revenue towards these efforts. When you look at the suite of programs that are offered in agriculture, when it comes to regenerative agriculture, environmental agriculture, these are cutting edge programs that are not offered in any other states, around our country. And all of these programs are overprescribed, meaning that there's such an interest and a benefit from these programs that we aren't, seeing their potential because of the limited amounts of investments that we've made. And so that's why it was encouraging to see this, this administration, our governor, make additional investments in this budget. And that's why we, in our, through our bonds effort, have sought to create a greater level of investment, so we aren't so dependent on, fluctuating some cap and trade dollars.
Wonderful, thank you. And Amanda or Michelle, if you'd like to address that question, you can raise your hands. If not, I'm happy to move on to the next question. And again, we have so many. Please, I apologize, we won't be able to get them all to them all, but some of the questions that you folks asked will be addressed more directly by the producers panel that's coming up in just a couple of minutes. But I'm curious more about sequestration on BLM lands, state forestry lands. We're talking about farms and farmers. Maybe for you, Assemblymember Rivas, then maybe Amanda can speak to this from her perspective too. What is the state doing to work with the feds, and what can we do as far as BLM and state forestry lands are supposed to be on board, but Steve says he's hearing nothing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I think this question is probably most appropriate for Amanda, but I can tell you that it is encouraging, as a legislator, to learn about what this new administration, the Biden administration, what Agricultural Secretary Mr. Vilsack is proposing, as far as, really trying to invest significantly at the federal level in carbon sequestration efforts and compensating those within agriculture, creating a program to create an incentive-based system when it comes to the potential around sequestration. And so, but as far as, the engagement between our agencies at the state and at the federal level, I think Amanda would probably be best to answer that question. But it's very encouraging what we're hearing out of this new administration.
Amanda?
I would totally second that it's really exciting and sort of incredible to see the proposals that they're coming forward with and the speed with which they're moving. This is obviously an area that they're paying close attention to, and particularly focusing on agriculture. So I second that, and would just say on the BLM question, we have really good working relationships with the federal government, particularly as it relates to managing forests. And I think, I'll have to sort of check in on the specifics for BLM, but I would just say, the effort that we just entered into through sort of the shared stewardship agreement, but also sort of broadly within the context of the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan, there's a lot of collaborative effort that's being undertaken to increase climate action on our sort of shared the lands that we sort of co-manage and care about here in California. And I know that BLM is an active player in that space. So I can't answer the specific question, but I do know that they're at the table and committed.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask one more question, and I'll start with you, Michelle, before we move on to our producers panel, which, by the way, I think will answer many of the questions that some of the people are popping in about specifics about sequestration and how to measure it. But we had a really good question from Kirsten Arnett, who asked, aside from supporting legislative efforts, which, by the way, we're going to give you a chance to do here at the end, what are other day-to-day actions individuals and communities can take to help keep the momentum going. Michelle, what would you suggest to the mayors, council members, activists, and others who are here today about what they can do in their communities to drive nature-based sequestration forward more quickly?
Well, there is legislative action. It is also reaching out to our representatives to let them know that we care about this issue and that it's important to make sure that we are supporting communities and landowners and local governments, in taking comprehensive action to address climate change, which needs to include natural and working lands. I think on an individual basis too, let's, to the extent we can, be aware of what we buy and try to support, either the food or the materials or the things that we purchase, that they are done in a way that is sustainable to the extent we have that information, and share information with colleagues, just education, right? And just really helping to spread the word and the information. So there is a broader understanding and support for comprehensive climate action, with lands, natural and working lands being an essential part of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to close perhaps with one last question for the Assembly member, and you can wrap your answer to the last question together with your answer to this next question. I'd like to have you perhaps address, since the climate crisis is so urgent, how else might we be able to accelerate climate action in agriculture more broadly, as well as the question about what folks can do in their individual communities for nature-based sequestration. So I'll turn it to you for that last comment.
Sure. Well, I agree with Michelle. Look, agriculture isn't just the responsibility of rural areas, or, the impacts of agriculture aren't just the responsibility of rural areas in California. As consumers, we are all dependent on a sustainable and a dependable food supply chain. And so doing everything we can to bring awareness and advocacy around these issues that impact agriculture, environmental agriculture, regenerative efforts, sequestration efforts, incentives for agricultural farmers to allow them to change their traditional practices on the farm are incredibly important, as well as ensuring that our most vulnerable workers, our agricultural and farm workers, that they're taken care of. When we talk about how they live in some of the worst inhospitable some conditions in the world, right here in our Golden State, and that needs to change. But also in line with what Michelle said, obviously we think of climate change globally, but we must do everything we can locally, and that's why I encourage local governments within my district and throughout the state to do everything they can to not waste another minute and begin to develop local climate action plans, and to do what we can to address this climate crisis strategically and locally.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Assembly member. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Michelle. You were all absolutely fantastic. A lot of great information. Thank you, all the attendees, for your questions. I'm also happy to report that we've had over 30 new endorsements for Climate Safe California. I'm going to ask Nina to drop that link in there one more time, so those of you who have not had the chance to do so can see it, as well as 3 organizations. But let's move on. I think we're going to get real answers to some of the questions you've all been asking from our agricultural producers perspective panel. And so in order to introduce our speakers and moderate that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ellie Cohen, the CEO of the Climate Center. Ellie?
Thank you so much, Duran. I want to acknowledge that Tori Estrada of Carbon Cycle Institute had organized this panel and is ill today. We wish him a quick and full recovery, and thankfully he prepared well, so I can jump right in. So I want to welcome our panelists, Ellie Igo from Carbon Sink Demonstration Farm, Aaron Stainthorpe from Jackson Family Wines, and Albert Strauss from Strauss Family Creamery. I'm going to start by asking each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and your operation. So we'll start with Ellie. If you're ready, there you go.
I am. Hello, y'all. Greetings from the ancestral land of the Pyomochiam, or the Poma Band of Luiseno Indians. We rent our land from them and wouldn't be farming without their partnerships. I want to acknowledge them first. So Solidarity Farm partners with a network of about 30 other small BIPOC farmers in Southern California to distribute throughout our area. Really excited to be here today to talk with you all.
Thank you, Ellie. Aaron.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Schreiber-Stainthorpe. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Jackson Family Wines. Jackson Family Wines, we are a wine producer. You'll probably see some of our wines in grocery stores like Kendall Jackson Chardonnay or La Crema. And Jackson Family Wines is committed to becoming climate positive. And so a lot of the conversation that we're having here at the national, state level, we're essentially having within our business. And so decarbonizing or becoming climate positive requires both reducing our emissions and then leveraging soil carbon sequestration to help get us across that finish line. So very excited about this topic. And I'll also mention, I am thrilled to be on the board at the Climate Center because you can just see the great work that the Climate Center is leading to really be thinking about how we drive this at a policy level across the state. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Aaron, and we love having you on the board. Albert, please.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm Albert Strauss, founder and CEO of Strauss Family Creamery and Organic Dairy Farm. And what I've tried to do, what our mission and our vision is to create a model of local and regional organic farming and a food system that is good for the planet, builds soil, animal welfare, supports farmers and the true cost of food, and is good for the community and help revitalize the community. So at the same time, providing high quality local food. We were the first certified organic dairy and creamery west of the Mississippi River in the beginning of 1994. And we're the first 100% organic creamery in the United States. So with that intro.
Well, thank you. You definitely have been a trailblazer and we're fantastic to have you here. My first question for our three panelists, who are all producers, what do you say to other producers that ask you why you are employing these approaches and what are the benefits you're seeing on farm? Who would like to go first? I guess I'm just going to call on you. Okay, Ellie, there you go.
We're just going in order. So, you know, I'm going to have a really humble answer here. As soon as the panel started, I started weeding this row, and I just wanted to show everybody this vegetable row that did have lettuce is filled with an invasive weed that we call coquito. And if I were to go through and till this up, it would spread and become a much worse invasive weed problem on our farm. And so instead of coming in and tilling it up, I am pulling it out by hand. And that is a decision that I make, one, because I'm listening to my land, and two, because it's the right thing to do as far as sequestering carbon and truly being a carbon sink farm. And I just want to highlight this because I feel like, along with my co-presenters here, this isn't something that you decide and don't do something about. You know, this is something that affects every single decision that you make, and causes you oftentimes to do a lot more work. And so when you want to talk to other farmers about it, you have to come at it in a really pragmatic way and be clear to explain that this isn't something that, you know, is going to show dividends overnight. This is something, however, that if you're listening to your land, you know, could save you in the long run. And I'll just close by saying we had a heat event of about 122 degrees on the farm in 2017, and we lost all of our crops. We've invested in regenerative climate smart solutions. This year we had an event that was 121 degrees and we lost nothing. So it pays off, and the hard work pays off is what I would say.
Thank you, Ellie. Aaron.
Wow. Well, it's great to hear kind of Ellie talk about, you know, what that looks like on her farm. I think a lot of times when I talk about regenerative farming or soil carbon sequestration, I like to use the analogy of exercise for people. And I like to use that analogy because I think for people that aren't as familiar, you get such a holistic range of benefits. You know, I know for me personally, when I exercise, I feel better, my body's healthier, I sleep better. And I think when we think about for the land and for farming, it's a whole range of benefits, from greater productivity, reduced erosion, greater water holding capacity, more biodiversity, and that list just keeps going on. I think for a lot of the producers that we work with, and I'm pretty wine centric here, for us, I think we're really lucky that most winemakers think a lot about place. They love to be able to take you right back to the vineyard, and they want you to be able to taste the terroir or the land in the wine itself. And so there's a lot where we can talk about when we're farming regeneratively, we're really letting the natural notes of the land shine through. And you can taste, you know, all the quality and care that goes into cultivating healthy soil and a diverse ecosystem on the property. So we can directly connect regenerative farming, which is leading to soil carbon sequestration, with making better wine. And so that's a win all around. Just, you know, like Albert was talking about, like, we want to make a better product that's better for our community and better for the planet. And you keep getting all these synergistic benefits. So I think that is all really exciting to see where we can directly connect better farming with better outcomes, both for the people and, you know, for our customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Albert.
So what I've tried to do is create a model of farming that is, let me back up a little bit. 3 years ago, I gave a BHAG to my sustainability director.
What's a BHAG? Not all of our viewers know what that is.
That's what I was going to explain to you.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, please.
It's a big, hairy, audacious goal to be carbon neutral on my farm by the end of this year, and expand it to the other 11 farms that supply our creamery in Sonoma County by the end of the decade. And what it is made up of 4 components. I put it on my screen. Is I'll start at the top, is that we have had for the last 17 years, we have retention ponds for our manure when the cows are being milked or confined. And the methane digester, the bacteria digest the manure and create methane gas, and we capture that gas and produce electricity, all electricity for farm. We just joined with BMW, take advantage of the low carbon fuel standard in California, and creating a model of a digester that's scalable from 100 cows on up, that can be replicated. Farmers don't have to operate a energy plant, and they can get a revolving fund that money, they don't have to go in debt and get money from a revolving fund to build, to build it, and has a return on investment. The goal is 5 years, and have another revenue source. The second part of it is we're looking at being this summer the first commercial trial for a red seaweed for reducing up to 95% of the enteric methane, the belches coming from the cows, not the farts. It's really looking promising. We've gotten really good support from the state of California, the CDFA, and the National Organic Program to allow this to happen. And we expect that to be part of our carbon neutral plan. The third thing, just going in sequence, is that we're getting off fossil fuel. So 4 years ago, we put together a fully electric truck that's in the picture behind me that is feeding the cows, powered by the cow's waste. So the cows are powering the truck that feeds them. We're about to be done with a full-scale electric loader. So we are working on that diligently. The fourth thing is we had the first dairy to have a carbon farm plan back in 2013 to sequester, the total sequestration was around 2,000 metric tons per year. Half of that's coming from our half of it from our digester. Other practices from, compost application, using animals to graze and rotationally, planting hedgerows and windbreaks, is sequestering carbon. We're showing that livestock and best management practice around rotational grazing is actually a solution to climate change, where you can reduce it's one of the only practices where you can reduce climate change rather than, reverse climate change rather than reduce it. And so it's being internationally recognized as such. So I'll stop there. So
that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, a second question for our panelists. What are the opportunities you see in your operations to extend the scope of conservation practices and climate beneficial approaches? Who have been your key partners in making this happen? And I particularly want to frame that in the context of the severe drought that we're in the early stages of. What does that mean? And how do we expand that and model it? Go ahead. Who would like to go? Well, I'll switch the order this time. I'll start with Aaron.
Okay, I gotta find my mute button. Well, Ellie, I think that's a great question. I think for us, the drought is very pressing. I know this morning I just got off the phone with some vineyard managers that really don't have water this year. And so we're trying to figure out how to handle that. And I think to Ellie's point earlier, a lot of regenerative farming builds resilience into the system. So you're better prepared to handle changes. I think to talk about our thought partners and kind of the opportunities we see, I just want to give a little bit of context for the work that we've done to date. So really at Jackson Family Wines, and for those of you who don't know, we farm about 13,000 acres. So we're farming all up and down the coast of California and into Oregon. We've started to try to understand what research is out there. And in addition to looking at the existing research, we actually sponsored research with the Soil Health Institute to look at peer-reviewed research for Mediterranean climates, in particular vineyards, for how they can sequester carbon. And we've been sharing that information out with some of our vineyard or some of our winery partners that are part of this international effort we've established called International Wineries for Climate Action. So we're trying to share the research that does exist. We're also doing a lot of work right now to baseline our soils. And I think just looking at the chat, there's been a lot of interesting conversations really about the variability that we see of soil carbon sequestration. And so this summer, we're partnering with Skidmore College out of New York State to do very intensive soil carbon monitoring. And I am very happy to say that I was out in the vineyard yesterday taking a soil sample. And what we're gonna do is oversample our vineyards, a select number, to get very, very detailed soil carbon records. And then we're gonna use data algorithms to really figure out the best way to start to get this data, because we need to understand the science behind soil carbon sequestration so then we can best model how we can change our practices to increase that over time, and also see that variability when we're all up and down the coast of California. How do the native soils, how do the temperature, how do a whole factor of different variables impact that? So I think that's what we've done to kind of understand the field, and then that's our practice this year to baseline. We also have pilots in place. So at our Sara Lee's Vineyard, which is part of our La Crema brand, we've had a 5-year trial there that has been in partnership with the Sonoma Resource Conservation District, and that's being funded from the California Department of Food and Ag Healthy Soils Program. And there we have 6 different variables that are going in a 22-acre plot to really look at cover crops, tillage, compost application, and study how can we increase soil carbon in the soil. So I think that's how we've been looking at, can we get real data in the field so we see how this impacts us, and we take this from kind of these models to this is what we're seeing in our vineyard. We are planning on scaling this up, you know, and I think I said we farm 13,000 acres. Our plan is to move slowly to get it right. So over the next 5 years, we're targeting 15% of our properties will be using these regenerative practices. That's 1,900 acres. But our end goal is to roll this out everywhere. And we are trying to share this externally for especially other vineyards. But, you know, I think a lot of agriculture, we can all learn from doing the same practices, because while each site is different, the principles I think are very, very similar. So I'll leave it there, but I think Duran said it really well earlier, where this is a team sport. So we need to be thinking about how we can collaborate and share knowledge.
Great, thank you. Albert.
So it's interesting, the compost applications that I've been doing for years and manure applications, actually, we've had less than 12 inches of rain on my farm this year, but we've had one of the best pasture seasons ever. And it's really showing that compost application, rotational grazing is really beneficial. Organic systems which require maximizing the pasture, the cows on pasture and the amount they get, is really showing that these are not only environmentally beneficial, it are also economically beneficial for farmers. And so all these practices that I implement have to have a return on investment and be profitable for dairy farmers. And we really and I feel that all the organic rules and commitments are aligned with all the environmental and sustainability goals that we have as a society. So I think that that's really good. As far as partnerships, Blue Ocean Barns, who has been the people that out of the UC Davis research on red seaweed, they came up with they're commercializing and doing trials. There was a question about where the seaweed's harvested. It's going to be, it was wild harvested for the trials in the Azores, but it's being commercialized in Hawaii and Southern California in tanks. Marine Carbon Project and Carbon Cycle Institute has been really fundamental on a lot of the carbon farming practices and implementation and plans that we are proposing nationwide to the Biden administration. MALT, the Marine Agricultural Land Trust, who is very supportive to us. My mother was a co-founder of it was the first agricultural land trust in the nation, and it's preserved 54,000 acres of about 100,000 acres of agricultural land in Marin County. And the RCDs, a lot of the National Organic Coalition and all those people. So that's a brief summary of that.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to have Ellie answer this also. And then unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I'm going to start sharing a couple questions, at least from the audience. We could spend a few days together, and this is excellent, but we just don't have the time today. Just a taste of the incredible work you're all doing. Ellie, please.
Sure. So using reducing tillage, adding compost, being mindful of our systems and just thinking in line with regenerative practices, we've been able to grow the soil organic matter on our farm from 1% to about 5%. And really pragmatically, every 1% increase saves me an acre-foot of water. So, like when it comes to the drought, obviously, there's an equation there, a direct connection. I just want to highlight and I guess reiterate the importance of consumers as partners. We have some awesome mentors and institutional partners that we work with, but I think there's some really innovative partnerships out there that have had a huge impact on our farm. The first I'll refer to is Zero Food Print. So Zero Food Print partners with restaurants. They add 1% tax to the restaurant bill, and then they reinvest that on regenerative farms. And so that is just been a phenomenal partnership. And then the food hub that we operate and this campaign that we've launched called Fight Climate Change with Your Fork is also kind of trying to reach out and make it super clear that farmers can be heroes in the climate movement. And so far they haven't been made central. I sit on so many different, I listen to a lot of different conversations, and I think that the climate kind of justice movement is just waking up to the value of agriculture and farmers. And so I would say to everyone who's on this call, if you don't have one item in every single meal that's from a regenerative farm, then you're missing an opportunity. So please start there, fight climate change with your fork. Also do the good work that you're doing at your organization. Start with committing to one regenerative item, local item per meal, and then scale up from there. This is an industry, it's not a social service. And so it really can be driven by people's choices, backed up by solid policy that's helping to get us out in front of solutions.
Thank you, Ellie. That's great. So some questions from our audience. What can the state do and state policy to support some of the monitoring efforts, excuse me, and scaling in partnership with people on the panel. Go ahead, Aaron.
Sure. I'll just start. I mean, I think at a very high level, funding always helps, right? I think right now when we're talking regenerative agriculture, we're not talking about mainstream. And so when we see things like the Healthy Soils program, any funding that they can have to help people do pilots to demonstrate this is really valuable. I also think there needs to be more work done to build the business case for this and really help build some of the models that let us track carbon sequestration potential over time, right? There's been a lot developed with Comet, but I think for a lot of farmers, they need more help and we need kind of more research to support this. And it would also help both at the state and federal level to really have some dedicated funding to coordinate the agricultural research across agencies, because for farmers that are trying to make the switch, there's some changes that feel scary. I think for a lot of the farmers that I work with, you know, regenerative practices, some of them are asking them to give up tools in their toolbox that they've used for a long time, like tilling the soil. And so to make that change, I think the more support we can give people, the more comfortable they can be with then making these changes that will end up being really positive for the soil, positive for the planet. And, you know, at the end of the day, when we can connect these two, they should really be positive, as Ellie said, for, you know, the businesses that are running this.
Great. I'd like to ask another question that's come up, which is really what's the distinction in your minds between regenerative and organic, and why have we not been talking so much about organic? So just anybody want to, you did, Albert, some, so sorry, please. Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah. So yes, I appreciate the question, because regenerative has been a kind of another term, a more politically correct term for, our marketing term for carbon farming. It's organic farming is a farming method that doesn't use pesticides, doesn't use herbicides, synthetic fertilizers, and in dairy's case, no antibiotics or hormones. So it's a bigger, and its main tenet is to build soil to organic standards. Regenerative still allows all those additives, yet you're building soil. So I think it's talking about one aspect of what organic, certified organic means, as well as a lot of other labels do.
Great. Ellie or Aaron? Yeah, Ellie, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just, it's interesting because I think I would say it's almost the reverse. I see organic as a more narrow description and regenerative is broader. I think that there's things that are missed in the organic conversation, like, are you regenerating your community? You know, are you regenerating the livelihoods of your workers? You know, all these pieces that, you know, organic is very defined by policy now. I think it used to be a movement. And now regenerative is a movement, and we'll wait to see what happens when they try to legislate it into being defined.
Different perspectives. Thank you very much, Ellie. Another question, Albert, can you tell us what you do with the digestate following anaerobic digestion for biomethane?
All the manures and, well, we compost the solids and the liquids. All of it goes back on our land as fertilizer in organic systems. It's one of the only beneficial, nutrients that we can put back on the land. So compost, we make our own compost. But it all through the digester, it actually converts the nutrients and makes it more available to plants. So I think it's really, it's been a beneficial system for us.
Okay, great. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I have many questions myself to ask, and there are other questions on here, but a lot of people have been asking what are the best resources for information about regenerative farming, where to purchase things at regenerative areas. Do you have that available? Can you put it in the chat? And we can also make it available online from you later when we put this webinar online. And I guess my last question for each of you, and it has to be really brief, 10 seconds each, is if you could wave a magic wand and make anything happen in California to address the climate crisis from a sequestration point of view over the next few years, what would you do? Ellie?
I would push the state policy down to the local level at the county and make sure that the caps that are being written or revised include farmers at the table and include carbon farming solutions.
Excellent. Aaron?
I don't have a quick answer. I'd say just increasing the value that we all place on a handful of dirt, because it is truly amazing if we actually elevate it and give it the respect that it deserves.
Thank you so much. And Albert?
I feel that we need to really have a dialogue in this society about, and a research agenda that really puts forward these this science and this practices, and kind of come up with where we can meet in the middle. You know, it's not black and white. How can we make this progress as well as best we can, and respect each other?
Well, thank you three for the fantastic work each of you are doing on your lands, and for your leadership in this regenerative movement to address the climate crisis and ensure food security. We are really grateful to you. Ellie Igo of Carbon Sink Demonstration Farm, Aaron Stainthorpe of Jackson Family Wines, and Albert Strauss of Strauss Family Creamery. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it now, I think, to Nina or to Duran. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but we're going to pass it on to Nina. Some of the exciting stuff. Don't leave, y'all, because we've got some really interesting things for you, including a wrap up. But first, I'd like to turn it to our colleague Janina, who's going to tell you about some actions that you can take right now to help drive this this movement forward. Nina?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Janina Turner. I'm the Energy Program Coordinator here with the Climate Center. I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar. Showing up with us here today is one thing, but taking direct action is how we make change. So if you haven't already, please take action by endorsing our Climate Safe California platform. Just redrop the link in the chat. But another action you can take right now is contacting your assembly member and asking them to support Assembly Bill 284, which is what Assemblymember Rivas told us about earlier. So AB 284 accelerates state action to advance the climate benefits of California's natural and working lands. It provides much needed policy direction and guidance to ensure that California forests, urban green spaces, rangelands, arid lands, agricultural lands, and wetlands are integrated into state plans and policies to support carbon sequestration and foster climate resilience. The bill would require that the California Air Resources Board, the Natural Resources Agency, and other agencies must work to update plans, develop methodologies, and establish milestones under CARB scoping plan to achieve emission reductions in order to capture the benefits of carbon sequestration on natural and working lands. So I'm going to drop another link in the chat. It'll be titled Take Action for AB 284. And if you scroll down a little bit on the page, you'll see a form asking you for some basic information, name, email address. That way we can identify who your local assembly member is, and we will send them a pre-written script, a letter asking for your support for AB 284. So I'll give everyone a few seconds or a minute to fill that out. It'll be really quick and easy. Then you'll just click the submit button at the bottom and boom, your assembly member has your letter urging for support. And I'll give you again. And if you want a deeper explanation of what I just said, if you click the link, a lot of what I just explained is on that web page as well. And I know we're running out of time, but feel free to just open that link. If you don't have time to fill it out right now, keep it open. You can do it later and you can share with your network so we have more support letters going out. So I'll pass it back to either Duran or Ellie to close us out.
Thank you so much, Nina. And this is all about taking action. We drive policy forward together. I think it was Ellie who said, if policy is a sailboat, we are the wind. So let's all blow harder to make these things happen. I actually am going to invite my colleague Barry Vesser onto the call for just a moment, because, you know, we hear a lot during these webinars, so many things that we all covered. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to kind of keep in our heads. What is it we really learned today? Well, Barry has been lingering in the back, capturing some of the key takeaways. So in about 1 minute, I'm going to ask Barry Vesser to hop on the screen and tell us a little bit, sort of summarize what it is we heard here today. Barry?
Sure. Thank you, Duran. And thank you, everybody, for hanging with us to this point. And I do have the unenviable task of trying to summarize that bevy of incredible perspectives that you just heard. So without further ado, I'm just going to go through some things that I took as takeaways. Ellie at the top said, we can't get to net negative emissions by 2030 anytime soon without carbon sequestration. It's totally essential. And that there is a huge difference between mechanical sequestration like CCS or direct air capture and nature-based sequestration. The latter has multiple benefits and has been proven through numerous studies to be beneficial. Jeannie explained to us how a coalition of groups have worked over the years with farmers and legislators to actually get us to this moment where we have the legislation that could really move California forward. And Assemblymember Rivas talked to us about some of the environmental justice components of this, how farm workers are impacted by heat, and they're the ones losing jobs as a result of drought, and really how we must create a more resilient food system. And then he mentioned a number of bills. I'm not going to go into detail of them all, but he mentioned AB 125, the bond he has to make more investments in the food system, AB 284, which Nina just highlighted for you, and AB 252, which is getting a big $500 million boost from the governor's budget. I think, Michelle, there was so much packed into her presentation, but I think one of the things that stood out for me is that California could reduce carbon by 500 million metric tons through the 13 practices that they identified on natural and working lands with incredible benefits, saving $24 billion for the state. And then Amanda talked about the governor's executive order, the 30 by 30 initiative, and how climate smart strategy builds on the work of the past to date and sets up a vision for how to include all of California's lands in achieving climate goals. And then our amazing panelists, just a couple of things from each of them. Ellie talked about how after putting in some climate smart agricultural techniques, she had an incredible heat wave, 121 degrees, and didn't lose any crops. Aaron talked about how a sequestration, you could look at it like exercise, multiple benefits. They get a better product out of it, and they are targeting 1,500 acres for treatment over the next 5 years. And then Albert talked about their groundbreaking efforts where they are using a methane digester and creating additional sources of revenues for the farm, and that everything they do has to have a financial benefit for farmers. So that is not everything, but that's some of the key highlights I came. And I just want to reiterate what Aaron said in closing, because I thought it was such a great comment. We all need to have a bit more respect for a handful of dirt, he said, but I will say soil.
Thank you, Barry, and thanks to you all. I'm just going to wrap by letting everybody know we have over 50 new endorsements for Climate Safe California. So thanks to you all. It's not too late to do so if you haven't done so yet. I want to remind you all about our next webinar, Funding Climate Action, on June 22nd from 10 to 11:30. I want to thank our sponsors again, Renewable America, Enphase, Jackson Family Wines, Recology, Willow Creek Wealth Management, Soil and Company, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, MCE, Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Sunrun, River City Bank, and Terra Verde. All of you guys are awesome. I want to thank every single person who attended here. There were hundreds of you. We thank you all for what you do. And we thank you not only for being here, but for what you do every day. And I particularly want to thank all of our speakers, Michelle, Ellie Igo, Amanda Hanson, Jeannie Merrill, Albert Strauss, Aaron Steinthorpe. You guys are all amazing. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge and your work. We look forward to continuing to work together with all of you, your organizations, and all of the wonderful people who are here today to achieve a climate safe California. That's our goal. We can do this. Thank you all for coming. See you next time.
Bye-bye, everyone.